Roll for Crit is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Come roll with us at patreon.com/rollforcrit. Only a couple of weeks into the new year, and publishers are wasting no time announcing their new board game titles for 2021. A lot of cool stuff to look at. We're going to take you through it right now. Slay the Spire is a popular roguelike deck-building video game that's made waves on Steam the past couple of years. It mimics the gameplay of a traditional tabletop deck-building game in video game form as you progress through different areas of a dungeon, fighting monsters and gaining new cards along the way to fill out your deck. It allows you to choose which path you take, and every element is randomized each time that you play. Now we are going to get an actual physical version of this one from Contention Games. They are bringing Slay the Spire, the board game, or card game I suppose you could say, to Kickstarter not too long from now. We do not know exactly what changes are going to be made from that digital version to the physical one just yet, but we do know it will have gameplay for between 1 and 4 players, and it will be a cooperative take, so you won't be fighting against each other. You'll be working together to progress through different levels and upgrade your deck as you go. We'll see if Slay the Spire, the board game, manages to live up to its original inspiration.
Anansi is making his way over to North America in this new trick-taking game. In it, you are trying to impress the trickster and storyteller collector by gathering tricks, which will be represented by cards that will make up stories. However, stories aren't really that important if no one's telling them. So those cards that can be used for tricks also can be used to make followers, who in turn will be interested in certain stories, spreading the word and making those tricks more valuable. So this is an interesting game where it's not simply just trying to collect the best tricks, but also making certain tricks more valuable. So you have to decide how you're going to spend your cards wisely.
Lost Empires: War for the New Sun is a new game from Colossal Games. They'll be putting it up on Kickstarter later this year. It's a deck construction game with a sci-fi setting. Each player is a different faction attempting to collect artifacts so that they can construct a worm gate to allow their armies to get through faster and easier to overtake the new territory that they've discovered. As I said, it's a deck construction game, so before the game, each player will choose cards based on their faction and make their own deck. Those decks will only be 18 cards, so nothing too crazy. You'll be able to do it as part of the setup before things begin. And as you play, you'll be trying to control different objects on the field and defeat enemies in order to take those artifacts and build that worm gate before anybody else can.
Hyperspace Smuggler was a game on Kickstarter that, while unfortunately unable to be funded there, has announced it'll be partnering up with Leader Games and joining its catalog of popular games such as Root and Fort. In this game, you were smuggling cargo in space, laying down tiles and trying to trick your opponents and maybe battle them. Now, while joining Leader Games, it's going to get a new theme. Instead of being in space, it's going to be on the open ocean with pirates, and we'll be working with the current title of Ahoy. Now, it seems that it's still going to have most of this core mechanics that you'd find, and I'm sure it still will be very exciting for both the creators of the original game, as well as everyone else who were unable to see this game funded will now be able to get it later on with this new coat of paint.
There are 3 new titles from Matagot that we're going to highlight to be released later this year. First one is Tiny Acrobats, which you could get as part of a recent Kickstarter, will now officially be going to retail separately. This is a follow-up / separate edition of Meeple Circus from the same designer, wherein it's a dexterity game. You are balancing different types of meeples, trying to gain points for how well you're able to do it. This one has a more streamlined rule set, is a little bit simpler, quicker to play. Next, they have Platypus, which is a deduction / guessing game. One player is going to be giving clues in the form of adjectives as other players try to guess which person or character they are trying to get them. And as they receive more clues, they'll be eliminating some of the possible options on the board, hoping to get closer and closer to guessing the right option. Then there's one called 9 Ravens, which was originally published as 5 Ravens from Grant Rodiak. And in this this one, you are a band of thieves. You're going to have a set of Raven cards in your hand, and you choose one to play as your action for the turn and another one that you put to the side as a thief, and that will have a different impact on your score at the end of the game. A simple, fast-playing game, but with a lot of different options based on all the different ways that you can play those cards.
Pandasaurus has announced its March release, and it's a new game titled Umbra Via. In this game, you'll be entering a mysterious garden and try to gather up cubes in this strange tile-laying auction game. The way it works is there's going to be a grid with no tiles on it, and you're going to be bidding on these tiles that make pathways. Once you place the tile, it keeps the cubes on them. And when the pathway is closed off, you'll then see who has the most cubes on there. And whoever has the most will be able to gather the winning cubes, and whoever can collect their winning cubes the most wins. The original version was all about using cubes, which represented your fragments of your soul. This one, though, as I stated earlier, has a bit more of a garden theme to it. Instead of cubes, you're going to have these little beautiful flower meeples for you to use. You can be excited to check this out, coming, like I said, in March.
Hadrian's Wall is a title from Garphill Games, which has now been announced to be co-published by Renegade Games Studios. It is a flip and write in which you are building the general Hadrian's Roman wall and trying to defend your empire from the Pict army. And now this is a flip and write, and typically those games are smaller, more contained. This one is pretty big and pretty complex. You have a large sheet of paper that you'll be able to mark a lot of different things off of. You're going to be gaining resources, using them for different actions to build different types of buildings, which will increase your resource production or unlock new sections of your sheet to be able to mark things off in and improve your score. This is one that should interest fans of roll and write or flip and write games, but want something that has a little more meat on its bone, a little more depth and complexity. Also includes art from Sam Phillips, who did games like The Raiders of Scythia. So take a look at this one if that's something that's up your alley.
In Hack and Slash from Steve Jackson Games, you play as guilds of adventurers, trying to complete quests in order for fame, glory, and of course, liberation of all that delicious loot. You're going to choose which quest you go on, roll dice, and see if you're able to succeed and gain all that glory, fame, and treasure, or maybe just slink back to the tavern. It looks like an interesting, quick game involving dice rolling, trying to gain the best quests for your guild, and also maybe gain some more recruits and adventurers for you to work for you and your guild.
Terraforming Mars is a popular and complex board game from Stronghold Games in which players take on the roles of different corporations, and they're going out there to colonize and terraform Mars for life and try to make the most money. There is a Terraforming Mars dice game that is slated for release, and now we have learned that they are also in development on a card game, Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition. This one is going to be hitting Kickstarter next month, at which time we will learn more about it, but right now, all we really know is that it has the same premise, the same idea as the original Terraforming Mars, and it is meant to be a quicker, faster, more streamlined version of that style of gameplay, which makes sense as it will be strictly a card game without a board.
The Initiative is a new game in which you play as kids from the 90s, and you find an interesting game called The Key. And while playing this game, you're actually going to be going back and forth from the board of The Key and to the book in the story, choosing options and finding out what mysteries and puzzles lie in wait for you. This game is the first from the studio Unexpected Games, which is founded by designer Corey Konecka, who has worked on many of our favorite games, including Battlestar Galactica and Mansions of Madness. Now, we don't know too much about this, besides it's very obviously going to be very heavy in the puzzle area and mystery, so you probably don't want to know too much, and you just want to dive in to learn what The Key has in store, not only for us, but for the characters who found it.
Wizards of the Coast has announced the first new Dungeons & Dragons book for 2021 called Candlekeep Mysteries. Rather than being a source book or one specific adventure for players to go on, this includes a set of 17 smaller adventures that could be played out as one-shots or peppered in somewhere into an existing campaign. Each one centers around books. So there's the Candlekeep library, which they will have a detailed layout for, and depending on which books players find, they will lead them off on some sort of new adventure relating to what they find inside. There will also be an alternate art cover that you can go for that's exclusively going to be available at game stores when the book is released in March.
This last one isn't a board game, nor is it a source book for an RPG, but something we think you may be interested in. It's a book entitled Celebrating Birds. It's actually a field guide all about birds in North America, but it uses the art from Wingspan. So if you ever looked at that board game and thought that art was beautiful, this may be a book you may be interested in picking up, because not only will you have nice big pages with the art, but actually be able to learn a little bit more about the birds in those pieces.
I love the concept of this one. Of course, everybody loves the art from Wingspan. Apparently, they also have kind of an interesting gamified version in there of like bird watching, where they have different points and things assigned to those birds. So it's almost like a real life version of Wingspan you can play if you want to get deeper into the bird side of it. Really, really cool idea. A lot of big announcements that are exciting. I feel like, all the publishers were just waiting for the start of the year, and now they are not holding back. And I think not the least of which that I'm interested to hear your thoughts on is Slay the Spire, which of course is a big video game. But what do you think about it being adapted to a physical game? Because from my perspective, it's like so on the nose. That game really is a card game. I mean, there are cards in it. It's not just like inspired by it. It's literally kind of a digital card game. This almost seems to me maybe redundant. I don't know if they're going to be able to do enough to make it worth playing separately from the video game version.
Look, Jonathan, we all know how the marketplace works. People only make video games nowadays so they can hope to make them into board games. That's just how this the cycle works. But
well, I made a joke on Twitter that in 2022 we're going to see the digital adaptation of the Slay the Spire board game.
Of course. But I mean, if there's an interest behind it, I mean, that's why they're doing a Kickstarter. It's great. And, sometimes you do, like, yes, as you said, this was bringing a lot of board game stuff to a video game. But maybe there's like something you just couldn't do well because you're playing it as a digital verse, and now you have people sitting around the table you can maybe bring in that make a bit more sense, or at least aren't as much of a pain to program. So I could see them trying to maybe like, what can we take advantage of because we're now in the physical space? Granted, then maybe we'll just see that digital version that you're talking about.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. It's interesting to say the least. What else from this list catches your fancy?
Well, I know I'm more curious about what your thoughts on is the Umbra Via or Via. We don't know, and that's even not including how I'm terrible at pronouncing things. Because it's a heavy auction game, and I know you're a big fan of that. But it's interesting how it works because you're bidding on pieces, but the pieces stay there, and the more pieces on there, they actually go less in turn. So it's not simply just the one who spends the most on something. Mm-hmm. And you can't rotate them either. So, if the L block isn't the way you want it, well, that's too bad.
Yeah, I always like, those kinds of spins on traditional auction style games. I think there's a lot of room for different ways to make it less about just, all right, I have 10 money, you have 9 money.
You're right.
That means I can win this one. And I think the style of it looks really cool. I've been liking, Pandasaurus, they make a lot of good games, and I like they have a different kind of interesting takes on things that could just be, more like abstract kind of designs, but they have a really warm, almost inviting look to it. And I think this has that. It's like, oh, that looks nice. I want to play that. It looks welcoming. So I thought that's pretty cool.
I definitely know the initiative is going to be high on both of our lists because, once again, heavy puzzle mystery, almost like Jumanji kind of style of finding a board game and there's more going on.
Yeah, I was going to say, of all these games, I think the initiative is the one I am the most excited for. Corey Koneska, like you said, he's designed some of our very, very favorite games. Loved what he did at Fantasy Flight, and so I'm really interested to see what he does outside of that studio. If he has more complete control over the final product here, and that that just sounds like one of those games that's made for me. It's one of those games that is like my ideal type of game. So yeah, I can't wait to learn more about that. If that comes out this year, like I'm already calling it as that being a potential top 10 game for me. It sounds really, really awesome. Although it is another campaign game, but at least it doesn't have, at least it's doing a different spin on it.
You heard that. Very high hopes. So
very high.
Keep that in mind.
Calling my shot.
I will say though that D&D book sounds really cool. It reminds me of those old shows like I think Tales from the Crypt was one of them where like, what's the mystery today? You take a book off the shelf, It's not like the full story.
It's an awesome idea. I really love the concept, and it's also just so very perfect for Dungeons and Dragons, which is all about opening up a book and using your imagination. It's like almost a meta kind of approach, and I just love that. I don't know if some of them will be like, like Myst, where you literally go into a book, or or if it'll be like, oh, this book has a map in it. You could do so much with that concept.
Oh, we're absolutely
really
gonna blue skidoo into some of those.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to comment on Terraforming Mars, because I just find it so interesting between the new card game and the dice game they announced. It seems like all of a sudden they've sat up and said, hey, this game is really popular. Maybe we should make a bunch of spin-offs of it, even though it came out like 8 years ago.
Well, I think what happened is that Kickstarter earlier about like the complete edition, and they're like, okay, we're done. What do we do now?
Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah, they have to use that license somehow, I guess. But I thought it was cool. The new one has all new art. It looks like illustrated cards. It looks a little bit different. So maybe for people who weren't as much of a fan of the style of Terraforming Mars, this one has kind of more of an illustrative look to it seems. But I'm very interested to see how that one is different too, because that's one of our favorite games, and I don't know if it's going to be by the end of this year we're sick of Terraforming Mars schemes or not, but
we'll see. Yeah. And also Ahoy, I'm really curious about, because we loved Fort, and we felt like they did a really good adaptation to not only make it more appealing, I think, than in terms of not just seem like very generic, but also was a great game. Though I wonder if you bring your game to Leader Games, are they like, I had fun playing it all, but what do you call it? Well, it's about dragons. Like, too many letters. Drake, still too many. I'm sorry, we can't accept your game.
Yes, if you are bringing a game to Leader Games, be prepared to have the theme be lost unless you can sum it up in 4 letters. That's very important.
Get a thesaurus.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a ton of things here. A lot of these games sounded really fun. Some of them we will only see on Kickstarter. Some of them we will actually see released in 2021. But let us know in the comments which of them you're looking forward to the most, because there's a lot. There's a lot of good stuff. And we just did our giant preview video of 2021, and already there's more coming up. It's going to be a crazy year, even if just like half of these actually end up coming out in 2021 itself.
We'd love to hear what you think is going to make 2021 a little bit better.
Until then, I'm Jonathan.
I'm Will.
And this was Roll for Crit. Support our Patreon, like this video, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.
Watch more of our content now to hold back Cthulhu's madness.